In 2018, Queen Elizabeth II gave Prince Harry and Meghan Markle a priceless wedding gift, a charming cottage on the Windsor estate. They poured their hearts and millions of dollars into making it their dream home. But just 5 years later, the new king would strip it all away, erasing every trace of their presence as if they never existed. This is the story of Frogmore Cottage, and how a royal family turned a love letter into a goodbye. To understand what happened at Frogmore, we need to go back to the beginning, to when everything felt magical and full of possibility. On May 19, 2018, Prince Harry married Meghan Markle in front of the entire world. She arrived at St. George's Chapel in a stunning white gown, and then, as they exchanged vows, billions of people tuned in to witness what many believed would be a transformative moment for the royal family. Here was a mixed-race American actress, marrying into one of the most powerful institutions on the planet. It felt like change was coming, like the monarchy was finally opening its doors to something new. In the weeks following the wedding, Queen Elizabeth II made a decision that would echo through the years. She gave the young couple Frogmore Cottage as a wedding present. To most people, this might sound like any other royal gesture, but those who understood the royals knew this was something special. The Queen was essentially saying, "We welcome you, we trust you, and here's a home of your own within our walls." It was an act of acceptance, a vote of confidence in Harry's marriage and his future with Meghan. His equivalent to roughly £50,000 today, around $65,000 in modern currency. Queen Charlotte loved the cottage because it was a serene retreat, a short walk from Windsor Castle, but far enough removed to offer genuine solitude and privacy. She and her unmarried daughters used it as an escape from the formality and pressure of court life. Over the next 2 centuries, Frogmore Cottage became woven into the fabric of Windsor history. Its very name came from the landscape around it. The estate was named Frogmore because of the large number of frogs originally found there on the marshland, a detail that would have amused Queen Victoria when she stopped at the cottage for breakfast on June 28, 1875. She found the frogs quite dreadful, she wrote in her personal journal, so many of them that the grass itself seemed to come alive. The damp, low-lying ground had given the entire estate its unusual amphibian name. By the 20th century, Frogmore Cottage had transformed into something different. What was once a single retreat had been divided into 5 separate housing units, all occupied by estate workers. It was functional but humble, the kind of place where people lived and worked rather than somewhere that captured imaginations or made headlines. This was the Frogmore that existed when the 21st century arrived. Just another part of the royal property portfolio, useful but unremarkable. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle received Frogmore Cottage as their wedding present, the first thing that became apparent was the scope of work needed. The property was what royal insiders described as pretty dilapidated. It had been divided into apartments for so long that converting it back into a single-family home required far more than cosmetic updates. The entire structure needed attention. The heating systems were outdated, the electrical wiring needed complete replacement, the gas and water main systems had to be completely overhauled. Over the course of approximately 6 months, massive amounts of work transformed the property from a collection of staff quarters into something worthy of a young royal couple starting their life together. Being spent on what was essentially a private residence. The media took notice. Questions were asked. Why should British taxpayers fund a renovated cottage for a royal who had just stepped back from his senior position? The controversy would simmer for years and ultimately contribute to the chain of events that would lead to Harry and Meghan's eventual departure from the United Kingdom. But in 2018 and 2019, when the renovations were underway, such concerns seemed distant. Harry and Meghan were excited about their new home. They weren't just overseeing the structural improvements, they were also adding personal touches that reflected their style and their vision for their life together. They installed a copper bathtub, a luxury detail that spoke to their aesthetic sensibilities. The entire property was painted with vegan paint, a choice that aligned with Meghan's own lifestyle preferences and values. A marble kitchen island with industrial pendant lighting was designed and installed, creating a modern focal point that contrasted beautifully with the countryside charm of the cottage itself. For the interior design oversight, they brought in Vicky Charles, the global head of design for Soho House. Vicky Charles was not just any interior designer. She represented a particular lifestyle aesthetic that Harry and Meghan had embraced, one that combined country farmhouse warmth with very expensive, modern touches. Soho House held particular significance for Harry and Meghan. It was actually at Soho House that they had their first date. So choosing Vicky Charles to oversee the redesign of Frogmore was a way of bringing their personal story and their preferred aesthetic into the heart of their new home. By April of 2019, just weeks before their first child, Prince Archie, would be born in May, Harry and Meghan moved into Frogmore Cottage. For the first time, they had a true home of their own within the royal estate. The cottage became a refuge during one of the most intense periods of media scrutiny imaginable. The press was relentless, following their every move, analyzing every detail of their lives. Frogmore offered them privacy and protection, a sanctuary, where they could be themselves away from the glare of constant public attention. They lived at Frogmore for less than a year. In January of 2020, just months after moving in, Harry and Meghan announced their intention to step back as senior members of the royal family. The statement came as a shock to the institution. They wanted to become financially independent, to split their time between the United Kingdom and North America, and to pursue their own commercial ventures. The decision was dubbed Megxit, a play on Brexit, and it immediately dominated news cycles around the world. The royal family was thrown into crisis mode. Queen Elizabeth II convened what became known as the Sandringham Summit, an unprecedented family meeting to discuss how to handle Harry and Meghan's departure. The Queen herself issued a rare personal statement. Within weeks, an agreement was announced. Harry and Meghan would no longer represent the Queen. They would retain the Royal Highness style, but would not use it. They would be financially independent of the British Exchequer, which meant they would need to repay the £2.4 million that had been spent renovating Frogmore Cottage. As part of the agreement, Frogmore Cottage would continue to function as their British home, their official residence in the United Kingdom, but they would need to pay a commercial rent for it. The agreement included a clause stating that the couple would spend a period of time in Canada and the United Kingdom during a transition period before eventually settling more permanently elsewhere. By the spring of 2020, Harry and Meghan left the United Kingdom and headed to North America. They initially went to Canada, but within a few months, they made the decision to move to the United States instead. In July of 2020, they purchased a $14.65 million estate in Montecito, California. The property sat on a private gated street and encompassed 7.4 acres of land. It was roughly 100 miles away from Los Angeles and represented a complete break from their former life in the royal system. Even after they moved to California, Harry and Meghan maintained Frogmore Cottage as their official British residence. They returned occasionally, including in June of 2022, to celebrate their daughter Lilibet's first birthday, and again following Queen Elizabeth's death in September of 2022. The cottage remained in their name. They maintained a financial agreement with the Crown, and they kept their belongings there. It was still their home, at least technically and legally, even though they were now living permanently on the other side of the world. Harry and Meghan repaid the full £2.4 million in September of 2020, just 6 months after announcing their intention to step back from royal duties. The repayment was intended to close the chapter on the public funding controversy. They wanted to demonstrate that they were serious about being financially independent and that they would not take advantage of taxpayer money. The repayment was significant, not just in terms of the amount, but in terms of what it represented. Harry and Meghan were drawing a line, establishing that the renovation costs were now their responsibility, that they had taken ownership of both the house and the financial obligation that came with it. For years, their arrangement seemed settled. Frogmore Cottage remained their official residence in the United Kingdom. They came back occasionally when duty called or when they wanted to spend time with family. The cottage had become a symbol of their attempt to maintain some connection to the royal family while establishing their independence. But everything changed when Queen Elizabeth II passed away on September 8, 2022. The Queen had been the great constant in the royal family, the figure who had guided the institution through decades of change. Her death meant that a new king would assume the throne, and that new king was Charles, Harry's father. The relationship between King Charles and Prince Harry had been strained for years. Harry blamed his father for a lack of emotional support during his relationship struggles, both in his marriage to Meghan and in his navigation of royal life. Harry had also publicly accused his father and other members of the royal family of not providing adequate security when the media intrusion became dangerous. The tensions that had simmered beneath the surface of Harry and Meghan's departure now had the potential to boil over. In February of 2023, Harry published his memoir, Spare. The book was explosive. It detailed his most intimate struggles, his mental health challenges, his drug use, his feelings of abandonment by his father, and his sense that the royal family had failed both him and Meghan. The book also alleged that his brother William had physically assaulted him during an argument. The revelations were shocking, and they sent shockwaves through the royal family and through the institution itself. The memoir became a bestseller, and Harry's honest recounting of his experiences resonated with millions of people around the world who saw in his story their own struggles with family dysfunction and institutional failure. But for the royal family, Spare was experienced as a betrayal. King Charles felt attacked. Prince William felt attacked. The institution itself felt under siege. Here was a member of the royal family publicly airing grievances that had always been kept private, discussing matters that were supposed to remain behind closed doors. The code of royal discretion, the understanding that you never publicly criticize family or institution, had been shattered. It was shortly after the publication of Spare that King Charles made his decision. In March of 2023, 2 months after the book's release and just 6 months after the death of Queen Elizabeth II, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Harry and Meghan had been requested to vacate Frogmore Cottage. The couple's representative acknowledged the request with a simple statement. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex have been requested to vacate their residence at Frogmore Cottage. No detailed reasoning was provided, at least not officially, but the timing made the message clear. King Charles was drawing a line. The cottage, which Queen Elizabeth had given to Harry and Meghan as a wedding present and a symbol of acceptance, was being taken back. What made this decision particularly striking was that it never would have happened while Queen Elizabeth was alive. Sources close to the couple later claimed that the Sussexes believed the Queen would have blocked such a move because the cottage had been her wedding gift to them. The Queen had always shown loyalty to her family members, even when she disagreed with them. She had demonstrated remarkable patience with Prince Andrew, refusing to publicly distance herself from him, even as his connections to Jeffrey Epstein and allegations of sexual misconduct became public knowledge. The Queen's instinct was toward inclusion, not exclusion. But King Charles operated according to a different playbook. By June of 2023, Harry and Meghan had officially vacated Frogmore Cottage. They removed their remaining belongings, and the residence fell empty. The cottage that had been their sanctuary, their symbol of connection to the royal family despite their departure, was suddenly closed to them. For the first time since Queen Elizabeth had given it to them 5 years earlier, Frogmore Cottage was no longer their home. The cottage has remained empty ever since. 3 years have passed, and no one has moved in. Even when King Charles considered offering it to Prince Andrew after stripping him of his royal titles and forcing him to vacate his much larger residence at Royal Lodge, Andrew reportedly declined. He apparently thought Frogmore Cottage was insufficiently grand for his needs. So there the cottage sat, empty and unused, a symbol of a relationship that had fractured beyond repair, a home that belonged to no one. The costs of maintaining an empty property on the royal estate accumulated. Routine maintenance expenses continued to be paid from the sovereign grant, the same taxpayer-funded mechanism that had originally financed the renovations. The irony was not lost on critics. Public money continued to support a property that no one lived in, a cottage that had become a monument to a failed relationship between a king and his son. In 2023 and 2024, the Crown Estate began assessing what to do with Frogmore Cottage. The property had become a problem. It was sitting unused within the Windsor security cordon, which meant it couldn't simply be rented out to private individuals. Security concerns were paramount. Windsor Castle was a working royal residence, and any property within its grounds had to meet extraordinary security standards. The Crown Estate needed to find a solution, a way to make Frogmore useful again, or to transform it into something that served the needs of the royal institution. For Harry and Meghan, Frogmore Cottage had represented something more than just a house. It was a connection to the royal family despite their departure. It was a place where they could return when they came back to the United Kingdom. It was a symbol of Queen Elizabeth's acceptance and her love for her grandson. Every time they returned to England, Frogmore was waiting for them, a physical reminder that they still belonged to this family, that they still had a place within the royal estate. Now that place has been taken away. Now there will be no cottage to return to. The personal belongings that they kept there have been removed. The copper bathtub is gone. The vegan paint will be painted over. The marble kitchen island will be replaced. Vicky Charles's careful design work will be stripped away. By the time the Crown Estate completes its renovation project, there will be nothing left of Harry and Meghan's presence. It will be as if they never lived there at all. It will be as if the entire Sussex chapter was erased from Frogmore's history. This story has parallels to other moments in royal history when relationships fractured and properties became symbols of estrangement. When Prince Andrew fell from grace, he lost the use of his military titles and his offices, but he has managed to maintain Royal Lodge, the 31-bedroom mansion he shares with his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson. Prince Andrew reportedly pays an annual rent of £365,000 for the property, though some have suggested he's had difficulty maintaining these payments. But Charles has not taken Royal Lodge away from Andrew, even though Andrew's scandal was in many ways more damaging to the royal family than Harry's public criticism. The fact that Frogmore Cottage was taken away but Royal Lodge was not raises questions about whether this decision is truly about practical estate management or whether it's about punishing Harry specifically for his disloyalty. Queen Elizabeth II had shown Andrew extraordinary patience and loyalty despite his connections to Jeffrey Epstein and allegations of sexual misconduct. She had essentially protected him from the full consequences of his actions. King Charles, by contrast, seems unwilling to extend similar grace to his son. There's also the historical irony to consider. Frogmore Cottage was built as a retreat, a place of solitude and privacy for Queen Charlotte and her daughters. During the Russian Revolution, it served as a refuge for Grand Duchess Xenia Alexandrovna, the sister of the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II. Throughout its history, the cottage had represented sanctuary and acceptance, a place where people found shelter during difficult times. It had been a symbol of royal mercy and compassion. That Harry and Meghan are now being denied access to that sanctuary, that the cottage is being stripped of every trace of their presence, represents a departure from that tradition. It represents a hardening of institutional boundaries rather than an extension of royal grace. Today, Frogmore Cottage remains empty and awaiting transformation. No construction work has begun yet, but plans are being finalized. The Crown Estate is assessing exactly how the property will be subdivided, how many units it will be divided into, and what timeline will govern the renovation project. Some estimates suggest that the reversal process could take years, during which time the cottage will likely remain vacant, continuing to drain resources from the sovereign grant while serving no practical purpose. The story of Frogmore Cottage is therefore a story about many things. It's about the transformation of a property from historical significance to family home and back to institutional asset. It's about the intersection of personal and political, about how private relationships play out against the backdrop of institutional power. It's about the fragility of acceptance, about how quickly a royal family can withdraw its grace when a member challenges its authority. And it's about the ways in which institutions protect themselves by erasing dissent, by removing evidence of those who have challenged them, by attempting to rewrite history to align with their preferred narrative. For Harry and Meghan, the loss of Frogmore Cottage is significant not because of the property itself, though it was beautiful and personally meaningful. It's significant because it represents the definitive severing of their ties to the royal family. There is no longer a home waiting for them in the United Kingdom. There is no longer a physical space within the royal estate where they belong. The message from King Charles is clear and final. The Sussex chapter is closed, the door has been shut, the key has been turned. And in the coming years, when construction crews strip away the copper bathtub and repaint over the vegan paint and remove the marble kitchen island, they will be literally erasing the last physical evidence that Harry and Meghan ever called Frogmore home. This is the story of how a queen's final gift became a king's calculated rejection. This is the story of Frogmore Cottage and how a house became the symbol of an irreparable break between a father and his son. This is the story of a royal family that chose to erase rather than to reconcile, to remove rather than to remember, to paint over rather than to preserve. And in doing so, they've created a monument to their own hardening, a testament to how quickly acceptance can turn to rejection, how quickly welcome can become unwelcome, and how thoroughly an institution can attempt to erase those who have challenged it from its own history. By May of 2026, a plan emerged. The Crown Estate announced that it would reverse the renovations that Harry and Meghan had undertaken. The cottage would be subdivided back into its original configuration, potentially into multiple units, rather than remaining a single-family home. The decision was made public just recently, and it sent a clear message. Not only was Frogmore Cottage being taken away from Harry and Meghan, but every trace of their presence would be erased. The copper bathtub would go. The vegan paint would be painted over. The marble kitchen island would be removed. Vicky Charles's careful interior design would be stripped away. The cottage would be restored to how it looked before Harry and Meghan had poured their hearts and millions of dollars into making it their dream home. A source quoted in various media outlets was particularly blunt about the intention. Get rid of any trace of Harry and Meghan. That's what the source reportedly said. The message was unmistakable. It's been empty for 3 years, the source continued. Even Andrew thought it wasn't good enough for him to move in. Maybe if they get rid of any trace of Harry and Meghan, then someone within the royal household will fancy it. The tone was dismissive, almost contemptuous. The effort was to suggest that the only reason the cottage remained empty was because of its association with the Sussexes, and that removing all evidence of their occupancy might make it desirable to someone else. The plan to reverse the renovations represents an extraordinary expenditure of time and money. Insiders have noted that it will require a major and expensive renovation to return the cottage to its appearance from the pre-Meghan and Harry era. The structural changes that had been made to convert 5 apartments into a single home would need to be undone. The systems that had been upgraded and modernized would need to be reconfigured. The carefully designed interior would need to be stripped out and replaced. Now, all of this would cost millions of pounds, nearly as much as the original renovation had cost. The Crown Estate would be spending massive amounts of public money to undo what had already been paid for. This decision has been interpreted in different ways by different observers. Some royal commentators argue that the monarchy is simply treating Frogmore as a working asset, making practical decisions about how properties on the estate can be best utilized. Amanda Matta, a royal commentator, told Fox News Digital that she doesn't see convincing evidence that this is an attempt to erase Harry and Meghan. Homes are regularly reconfigured depending on who needs them and how they're being used, she said. This is a pragmatic view, one that sees the decision as purely functional rather than symbolic. But others interpret the move very differently. Royal broadcaster Ian Pelham Turner suggested that the decision could be a shot across the bows for the couple, emphasizing that Frogmore Cottage was the forever home for Harry and Meghan after they spent millions renovating it to their tastes and needs. The reversal of those renovations could be read as a final statement, a way of saying that the royal family has completely closed the door on the Sussex chapter. The deliberateness of erasing every trace, of undoing the specific personal touches that reflected who Harry and Meghan are, suggests an intention that goes beyond mere practical necessity. The Sussexes themselves are reportedly not pleased about the planned renovations. Sources close to the couple told the royalist that Harry and Meghan are furious. They believe that King Charles waited until after the Queen had died to kick Harry out, because they know that the Queen would never have allowed such a thing. The Sussexes argue that Frogmore was Queen Elizabeth's wedding gift to them, and that by taking it back and erasing all evidence of their presence, King Charles is not just reclaiming property, he's rejecting his son. Some royal observers believe that Harry and Meghan's decision to publicly criticize the royal family is what ultimately sealed their fate. Tom Sykes, a veteran royal correspondent who has followed the family for decades, suggested that had the Sussexes simply left and moved to California without subsequently spending years chucking rocks at the institution, they might have been allowed to keep Frogmore Cottage. But by publishing Spare, by making the Netflix documentary series, by speaking publicly about their experiences with racism and lack of institutional support, they had forced the royal family's hand. They had given the institution no choice but to evict them and to signal through both words and actions that this chapter was definitively closed. Sykes acknowledged that the Sussexes are absolutely right in believing that Queen Elizabeth would never have allowed them to be kicked out. The Queen simply wouldn't have had the stomach for that particular fight. But at the same time, Harry was incredibly naive to think that the royal family would not pull every lever they could to force him into exile. The couple had essentially forced the monarchy to choose sides, and the monarchy had chosen to protect itself, its institutions, and its collective image over maintaining a relationship with a dissident son and his American wife. The reversal of Frogmore Cottage's renovations is therefore not just about property management or practical estate planning. It's about closure and control. It's about the royal family sending a message that is impossible to misinterpret. You left us, you attacked us, you published your grievances for the entire world to see, and now we are going to erase every evidence of your presence. We are going to undo the work you did. We are going to erase the traces of your taste and your vision. We are going to restore this cottage to how it was before you arrived, as if your time here never mattered, as if your chapter in this story was just a temporary interruption.